Our scripture reading this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man who was blind from birth. Jesus' disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned so that he was born blind, this man or his parents?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents. This happened so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him. While it's daytime, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After he said this, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and smeared the mud on the man's eyes. Jesus said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went away and washed. When he returned, he could see. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, a couple of weeks ago, or in the last several weeks, I was online and I came across this graphic called The 7 Sins of the Digital World. And I thought this was quite clever and quite accurate, to tell you the truth. So if you can see it up here, sin number 1 is lust, and that gets associated with Tinder, an app that people use to find hookups with each other. Yelp was associated with gluttony. This is a website we often use when we're looking for a restaurant that we think might be good. Greed was connected with LinkedIn, professional networking site. We're always looking for that next job, that higher paycheck. And then this might be my favorite up there. Sloth is associated with Netflix. Man, how much time have we wasted binging on Netflix shows? Wrath was associated with Twitter. You know, I never cease to be amazed at such an innocuous name, Twitter, and how profound it can be and the hurtful things that people say to each other on this website. Wrath was actually very fitting. I'm going to skip Facebook for right now. And then pride was associated with Instagram. People posting these photos of themselves on there, trying to look just so attractive. I even read an article recently, there's a thing called Instagram husbands, where these husbands feel their whole job is to just take pictures of their wives so that they can post and look good on Instagram. But let's come back to Facebook. Envy. This is so true. I was talking with a friend, and she was telling me, I need to take a break from Facebook, because when I get on Facebook, I start looking at everyone's lives and all the things that they're doing, and I begin to feel bad about myself. I'm not doing all of these things, and it began to evoke this feeling of envy. Well, here's the problem with Facebook. I think we could probably call it fake book. It is so unreal. It only captures a little portion of our lives, just a snippet of it, and we only put forward the part that we want people to see. Now think about it. Think about when people have their anniversaries, right? They go out and they take a little picture, a little selfie with their spouse or their loved one of them having their romantic dinner, and what a wonderful sweetie they have and all this kind of stuff. Nobody posts the picture of when you're in a throwdown with your spouse and posts that on the internet. We don't put that on Facebook. We filter everything out. It's like we're photoshopping our lives and only showing a little bit of it. The way this connects with our text today is it gives us an open view of the Christian life of discipleship. It doesn't Photoshop it. It doesn't Facebook the Christian life into just the good things that happen. It gives us a glimpse of the discipleship journey in all of its glory, its pain, and in its healing. It lets us see the whole thing. And so let's take a look at it through that lens this morning. So our text begins with this man being born blind from birth. And Jesus is passing by and he sees this man. And his disciples notice him too and begin to engage Jesus in a theological conversation. Who sinned, this man or his parents that he was born blind. Well, that's kind of weird to us. How could a man born blind have done something? There was actually this idea in the thought world of the day that you could engage in prenatal sins that could result in you being born blind, trying to find explanations for this. And so Jesus kind of pushes aside the theological conversation and says, this happened so that the glory of God could be revealed through this man. And so he begins to spit and make some mud, and he's making this paste. Well, this is the Sabbath, as we'll find out later on in the story. And there, in this day and time, in this thought world, there was roughly 30 activities that were labeled as work, and therefore out of bounds on the Sabbath. One of them was kneading. You weren't allowed to knead. So for Jesus to make this paste was considered a violation of the Sabbath. This is what stokes the controversy, that he's making this paste. And so he makes the paste, he puts it on the man's eyes and says, go wash in the pool of Siloam and you'll be able to see. And so the man does it and he's able to see. Now, it's important to remember again that within the Gospel of John, there's always two levels, at least, to these stories. Level number one is that there was a man literally born blind who has now had his sight restored to him. But level two is not only can he see physically, but now from a spiritual standpoint, he begins to see. And we're going to see how this develops throughout the narrative. And so this man is now able to see. But what's different about the blind man is that he doesn't initiate the healing with Jesus. Jesus sees him and initiates the work. It's different from like blind Bartimaeus in Mark chapter 10, who cries out and says, Son of David, have mercy upon me. And Jesus initiates it with this person. This is a picture of how we begin our faith journey. No matter what we might perceive that we think we might be initiating that relationship, he always starts the healing process. He always starts the discipleship process first. And this is a theme in the Gospel of John, or at least in the Johannine writings, I should say. Bob is going to be doing a study on the Johannine writings, the letters of John, and in 1 John 4:17, we get this verse where he says, we love because he first loved us. He's always there first, starting the relationship. Always. We might think we initiate it, but he's always there before us. I want to share with you a quote from Soren Kierkegaard. I believe I shared this with you this summer. It's kind of getting scary that I'm losing track of my illustrations and you're going to start hearing repeats here. But I think this one bears repeating. This is what he says. You have loved us first, O God, alas. We speak of it in terms of history, as if you loved us first but a single time. Rather than without ceasing, you have loved us first many times and every day our whole life through. When we wake up in the morning and turn our soul toward you, you are there first. You have loved us first. If I rise at dawn and at that same second turn my soul toward you in prayer, you are there ahead of me. You have loved me first. When I withdraw from the distractions of the day and turn my soul toward you, you are there first and thus forever, and we speak ungratefully as if you loved us first only once. Every time that we turn to God, he is there before us, ahead of us, waiting for us. He is always the initiator. That's how the journey begins. Regardless of how we perceive it, he is always the initiator in the journey. So this begins a process for this blind man. And you'll notice if we read through the narrative that his understanding of Jesus grows. His confession of who Jesus is becomes stronger, becomes more profound. So as soon as he experiences the healing, his neighbors and others that had seen him before begin to wonder, is this him? Because he couldn't see. He was born blind at birth, but now he can. And so they doubt it. And so they ask him, well, what happened? And so then in verse 11, the man answers, well, the man they called Jesus made mud and smeared it on my eyes. How does he understand Jesus at this point? He's just a man named Jesus. Well, then these friends, these neighbors, do him no real favor, and they take him to the Pharisees because of the controversy about the possible breaking of the Sabbath that day. And the Pharisees begin to engage him and ask him what happened, and they're struggling to believe this. And so finally they ask him, well, what do you say about Jesus? And then in verse 17, he says, he's a prophet. So now his understanding has gone from he's just a man to now he's a prophet. Well, they're still struggling with this. So then they enlist this man's parents. So they bring his parents in, and his parents want no part of it. Hey, he's of age. You ask him. We don't want to get kicked out of the synagogue, because that's what they're threatening at this point. That if you confess Jesus is the Messiah, you'll be kicked out of the synagogue. And so the parents say, go ask him. So they bring him back a second time, and they continue to interrogate him. And as they're interrogating him, they're trying to get him to say that Jesus is not from God. And in the midst of the interrogation, finally the man says in verse 33, if this man wasn't from God, he couldn't do this. So now he's confessing Jesus as a man from God. Not entirely different from he's a prophet, but he's still kind of maintaining. And he was faithful in the midst of this interrogation not to turn his back on Jesus. But how many of us experience that? Sometimes we make dramatic leaps in our faith. We go from he's a man to he's a prophet, and then we might plateau for a while. We just kind of hold even. We go through a period of where it feels like we're just kind of maintaining. Well, then they finally get so exacerbated with this man that they cast him out. They excommunicate him from the synagogue. And so it's at this point that Jesus finds him again and asks him, do you believe in the Son of Man, or do you believe in the human one? He answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. And Jesus said, you have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. And the man responds by saying, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped Jesus. Now he's at a place of real faith. We go back to the prologue. Jesus is God in the flesh. And now this man worships Jesus. Worship is ascribed only to one person, to God alone. This man has gone through a process from being blind and unaware of Jesus to the fact that he's a man, that he's a prophet, that he's from God, to finally worshiping him as God. This is a process. It's a journey. It's something that doesn't happen all at once. We don't come to faith in God and then everything is all worked out. It is an incremental process that we go through. And I want to come back to a little bit about what I talked about last week on this whole idea of being no longer enslaved to sin. When we experience that enslavement and then the freedom that can come, it doesn't happen all at once. It's often an incremental process. We need to be at peace with that. We need to recognize that that's part of the journey. But sometimes when we look back and we tell our story, we Facebook it. We Photoshop it. We make it seem like it all happened quick in the instant. It doesn't happen that way. It takes many times years to go through this process. Well, how did it go for this man? When Jesus opened his eyes and he began the journey of faith, how did it go for him? Did it go very well? Was it all smooth sailing and puppies and unicorns and rainbows? No, it wasn't. It wasn't even close. First of all, his friends see him, his neighbors, and they don't even believe it. I remember when I first came to faith, how many people told me this was just a phase that I would go through. Oh, it's just Jason. He's just 17 years old. He'll grow out of this, right? People don't want to believe it. And then he ends up being brought to the religious community, right? To the religious leaders, the very ones that should be the most supportive and encouraging of his faith journey. And what do? They interrogate him. They put him on trial. At one point, it becomes so nasty that the word there actually is abuse. They begin to abuse this man verbally. And then how about his parents? How did they respond to it? Nope, we're good. I mean, he's abandoned by his parents. Sometimes as we go through this faith journey, the ones that are closest to us, the ones that we would expect to nurture us the most end up distancing themselves from us. And to be quite frank, if we're going to not Photoshop the reality of the Christian journey, Christian community can be tremendously painful. He goes to these religious leaders, the ones who should get it and encourage it, and instead they try to wreck and destroy the work that God is doing in their lives. Makes me think back to when I first became a Christian. I've shared this with you a little bit, not this part of my story, but I became a Christian at 17 years old, a senior in high school, right around Christmas time. And then I went off to go to college the next year. So I'm about 8 months into my journey, and this opportunity opened itself up for me to be a youth intern. And at this point, I'd already given my life to Christ and felt a call to ministry. And so I had this opportunity to be an intern for this youth pastor who is nationally known. She was certainly regionally well known for her youth ministry, and this youth ministry was just blowing up in this church, and she was ready to hire an intern. And so I had this opportunity to work for her, and I was thrilled because my youth group had made such an impact on me. I was like, I'm called to be a youth pastor. This is what I want to do, and I'm getting to work with one of the best. So I start working with her, but mind you, I'm 9 months into my spiritual journey at this point, and I'm struggling with things. And at one point, it got so heavy, I decided to go to her and just kind of open up. And when I did, it freaked her out because she was surprised at the things I was struggling with, that I was so immature in my faith, that she was afraid that I wouldn't be able to lead her youth kids. And so she began to distance herself. She began to get really nasty towards me, and I didn't understand what was going on. I later found out she'd been on the phone. She was calling people that I knew, trying to figure out what to do with Jason, because I'm struggling in my faith 8 months into the journey. So at the end of the school year, and I thought I was going to be her intern for the next 4 years and get to be mentored and raised up underneath her, she pulls me into her office and she makes me take a spiritual gifts inventory. I take the inventory, she looks at the results, and she says, yep, that's what I thought. We're completely different. We can't work together. And as I'm processing it after the fact, I realize at the moment I'm getting fired. You know, I'm 18, 19 years old. I'm kind of terrified at this point. And I'm thinking to myself, well, doesn't that mean we work well together? Where you stop, I pick up, and vice versa? And she said, yeah, we can't work together anymore. And by the way, your personality is completely wrong for ministry. I think you've heard God's call wrong in your life. I don't think you're called to ministry. You're so shy. And here's the cherry on top. You're so shy that sometimes I watch you walking into the office, and you have such a pathetic look on your face. I want to slap you when you walk in the door. Yeah, she was a gift. Yeah. Bottom line is, like, this was an incredibly painful experience. And if you look back at my journey, and it's been so serpentine, I'm so weird. I wish I was one of those people that just did something and kind of had a career that was building. But I've sort of gone in and out of ministry. I've come in and out of it because there was this scar on my life. There was this very powerful voice in the back of my head that said, you've heard God wrong. You're not gifted and you're not called to do this. And it put a scar on my life. And it was the very community, the very people that should have been affirming me and encouraging me, and it wasn't. But that is a non-photoshopped view of the Christian life. And I am guessing that if we were to sit in a circle and we're willing to be vulnerable with each other, and we were to share our war stories about Christian community, we'd have a lot of stories to share, unfortunately, because we're all in process. People have stories to share about me. Somebody somewhere on a Sunday morning might be preaching, telling about something that I've done to them. We've all been on the receiving end. We've all been on the giving end of it. That is the non-photoshopped view of Christian community. It's part of the discipleship journey. But the man, he's continuing to grow. In spite of this adversity, his faith is growing. His confession of Jesus is getting stronger. But what is also interesting about this text, I would end this passage, this story at verse 38. Other people that are smarter than me end it later, but I ended at verse 38. I think that's a good stopping point. Out of 38 verses, Jesus is absent from 27 of them. As this man is going through some of his lowest, deepest, darkest times, Jesus is not present in the scene. How many of us have felt that and experienced that? As we're going through our lives, we're trying to be faithful followers, we're trying to believe, we're trying to nurture and grow our faith. It feels like all hell is breaking loose around us, and we look around and we say, Lord, where are you? Why are you absent? Now, just because we can't feel it, I have to believe and trust, but that doesn't mean God isn't at work. Even though Jesus is not present in these verses, I think the Spirit was clearly moving this man along in his faith, but at face value, it seems like he wasn't there, like he was absent. And this is a common experience that has been well documented throughout the Christian tradition. St. John of the Cross wrote a book called, or really a poem called The Dark Night of the Soul, that talks about how we go through these seasons and periods where we experience an absence of God's presence in our life. One of the most striking modern examples of this is Mother Teresa. I mean, a person that we would look at and we would think of all the people that would probably feel close to God, Mother Teresa is the one. But we know from her memoirs that were published posthumously, after she had been canonized, that she went decades of feeling God's presence not being available to her. Listen to this quote from a letter she wrote to a priest. In the darkness, and even though there's ellipses there, this doesn't mean there's text that's skipped over. This is how she starts it. In the darkness. That's where she's at. Lord my God, who am I that you should forsake me? The child of your love, and now become as the most hated one. The one you have thrown away as unwanted, unloved. I call, I cling, I want, and there is no one to answer. Where I try to raise my thoughts to heaven, there is such convicting emptiness that those very thoughts return like sharp knives and hurt my very soul. Love, the word, it brings nothing. I am told God lives in me, and yet the reality of darkness and coldness and emptiness is so great that nothing touches my soul. Wow. Talk about an unphotoshopped view of one of the most remarkable followers of Jesus in the history of the church. Finds herself in a place where she's like, where are you, Lord? Experiencing an absence of God's presence. That is a part of the journey that we all experience, but we love to Photoshop that out when we're talking with other people. We love to filter that out. The story doesn't end there. As soon as this man is cast out from the synagogue, which is no small thing, this was such a threat. This was such a terrible thing that could happen to a person that his own parents were willing to turn their backs on him out of fear of this threat. This is a big deal. And so this could be maybe his darkest time, who knows? But it's certainly a dark moment in this man's life. And it's at that moment that Jesus finds him again and leads him to a place of his fullest, most robust confession and expression of faith in terms of who God is in his deepest, darkest moment. That is a part of the story too that we do. We find ourselves in these awful, terrible places in life, and God meets us there, and we feel his presence sometimes. And at other times, it feels absent. But it's all of this. It is a powerful journey of healing where God takes us from a place of blindness to a place of sight. A journey where one day God will heal us completely, body and soul. But the journey to get there is painful. It's marked with trials. It's marked with high points, but it's marked with difficulties too. And we need to talk about that more, because that, my friends, is real to our experience, much more than a photoshopped, Facebooked version of the Christian life. I like to consider myself something of an academic. I'm by no means one of these super smart people that sneezes and a book comes out. I wish I was a person that could remember everything I read. I'm not that person as much as I wish I was. But I've been in the arena. And I remember when I was, talk about, non-photoshopped lives. I have 2 master's degrees. I started a PhD and then I didn't finish it. And now I'm trying to finish it again. I'm trying to get that done. But part of the reason I didn't finish it that first time is it was a tough, painful experience. One of the things that is just rampant in the academic world that everybody is aware of but nobody talks about is the imposter syndrome. I joke that when I was at Fuller in their PhD program, I was constantly looking over my shoulder for the campus police to come pick me up and say, "You are an admissions mistake. You don't belong here. You're not smart enough." Because when you're going through these programs and you're at the master's level, a lot of times when you have higher aspirations, you're one of the smartest, most gifted people in the class. But then you get to the doctoral level and everybody is the smartest, most gifted person. And I'm the dummy in the room, right? And we're all wondering that. We're all feeling it. And I was actually talking about this with my current PhD supervisor, who is well published, who is internationally sought out. And he said, "I'm sorry, Jason, imposter syndrome will never leave you." But nobody wants to talk about that. And I remember being at just particularly vulnerable places in my journey back at Fuller. And I'd go into these classes and feel like I said stupid stuff. And then I'd try to maybe talk to one of my classmates afterwards and maybe get them to open up like, "Hey, do you ever feel this way?" But we were so intent on proving ourselves that people wouldn't open up. And I just felt like I was dying. But then every once in a while, one person would open up. One person would say, "Yeah, I'm afraid of the campus police too." And when that would happen, it was like water on a parched soul. And what I've come to learn is if somebody like my PhD supervisor still has imposter syndrome, then these other knuckleheads I was in class with must have it too. We all are struggling with it. We're all dealing with something. There is no together person anywhere. There is no together person in this room. We all have our crap, our garbage, our baggage that we're dealing with. A job we hate, a marriage that's broken, relationships with our kids that aren't where they want to be. You name it. We've all got our stuff. There is no together person, and I just wish we'd talk about it more. I just wish we'd be more open, because I know from my own personal experience, when I talk with other Christians, and they open up about their struggles, it's like, I'm so glad I'm not the only one. Because we get on this island like we are. As we transition into our questions for reflection, I've got 3 of them for us today. Question number 1 is this: have you been pretending to be someone or something you're not? And related to that, if you have been, are you ready to be transparent and vulnerable? I talked a little bit last week that in this process of healing, in this process of being set free from our sin, being in community and small groups with other people where we really open up is the only way we do this. And I want to make sure that we characterize that kind of community carefully. Because it's not about sitting there and just asking and saying to another person, saying, "Hey, Sam, how's your prayer life going? You better be praying, Sam. If you're not praying, we're going to have some conversations here." It's not like that. I'm in a band meeting myself, and the way it goes is more something like this. Sam will ask me, hey, Jason, how's your prayer life going? "I'm struggling, Sam. I've only prayed a couple of times this week, and it was like pulling teeth." And then Sam says, "Me too. That's what it's felt like for me as well. How are we going to get in this together?" That's what this kind of community is like. It's about being willing to get together and to be vulnerable with each other and actually share a non-photoshopped, non-Facebooked life of the Christian journey. And then my last question is this: are you willing to let God love you right now as you are without waiting to reach some future point? We are always thinking to ourselves, I think, many of us, if I can just get this issue, if I can just get this baggage, this brokenness fixed, well, then I can let God love me. Then I will be lovable. And we view our relationship with God in these spatial terms, that you have us over here, then you have God, and then you have a big pile of sin, brokenness, whatever you might want to call it. I was reading an article this week, and they referred to this pile of stuff as rotten cat food and mayonnaise. Disgusting, right? Maybe disgusting, but it's such a powerful, accurate image of what we battle with sometimes and how we look at it. And we see ourselves as we just got to work through that, we got to fix it, and then we can be close to God. And all the while, God is saying, you've got your imagery all wrong. It's not in between us. That's not how I want to see this. I want to come around next to you, and I want to put my arm around you, and I want to love you in spite of the brokenness and the baggage, and I want us to do this together. It's not up to you to shovel your way through it and get to me. You can't do that. It's not going to work. We're going to work through this together. We got to be open to that, and that is hard for us to say, Lord, in spite of me, if I fix not one other thing in my life that you want to deal with, if I do nothing, you love me right now as I am, fully and completely, and to rest in that love. Be willing to do that. Let's pray. Lord, we invite you to just take these moments of silence and speak to us. Father, we want to stop being Facebook Christians. Stop photoshopping our lives. We want to open up to others and be authentic about this journey, this wonderful journey of healing that we wouldn't change but can be painful at times. And help us, Lord, to let you love us as we are, knowing that you want to work on our baggage with us. You don't call us to fix it before you love us. Help us to rest in that truth. In your Son's precious name we pray.